So thank you all for coming. I appreciate your support. It is my honor to introduce our host today. Beatrice Moore is the honorary consul of France in that position since 2008. And in that role, she represents the Republic of France and is equipped and certified to act on behalf of French citizens in Arkansas. She has lived in Arkansas for 25 years, so we embrace you as an Arkansan. She and her husband, Shelby, live in Batesville, where she is currently a board member of the Children's Advocacy Center of Independence County. Previously in France, she worked as the general manager of the Theater Rond Point on the Champs-Élysées.
Bravo for coming with this weather. I told the French consul that maybe we will have a tornado. He said, what is a tornado? I said, you will see. It's something unreal, but I don't know. We embrace tornado too, even though we are French and a little scared. Today, it's our first event, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Association Française of Little Rock. All the members are here, and I want to recognize them. Anne Josselin, Lucas Anderson, Julien Mirivel, Cathy Gelenic. Raise your hand like that. The one with the red beret, you know that she is something French. That you saw the Eiffel Tower. Jennifer Corbin. Okay. These people are amazing, and they embark on an adventure. Me, I was just saying, God, we do not have an Alliance Française. What's going on? They said, okay, we all go, and we all canoe, and we will have that. And I'm glad that they did that. But today, our event is more about history and the historical ties between Arkansas and France. And I think the best and perfect place was the MacArthur Museum of Military History because of this wonderful friendship of General MacArthur and France. General MacArthur is the French Legion of Honor, and he really connected the two countries. Here, a few years ago, and thank you, Stephen MacArthur, the board, Chip Culpepper, who helped me with the ceremony, we awarded the French Legion of Honor to 4 World War II veterans. And it was really emotional. France decided to give the medal to veterans who helped us to recover our freedom, who came, you imagine, from Arkansas. They maybe never went to Washington, and suddenly they are in France, Paris, Normandy. It was amazing. And we said thank you, and they didn't finish to say thank you for France, and thank you. And it was the first page of history that I was looking at, the World War II veterans and the participation of Arkansas. And I want to recognize the DIR, the Daughter of the American Revolution, because they go even before that. They recognize all the places in Arkansas, and I can tell you, my friend French, that we were there, that Arkansas was French. There was somebody called Jean-Baptiste Bénard de la Harpe, who left Saint-Malo in France, went to New Orleans, went on a ship, went on the Mississippi River, and suddenly turned to the Arkansas River and found a little rock, put the coat of arms of the king of France, and said, this is Little Rock, this is French. And since then, we all come like Dassault Falcon Jet. I said hi to all the people from Dassault because you are really a jewel for the city of Little Rock. And the Association Française is counting on you to have ideas and everything. I wanted to salute Congressman Frenchill. I don't know if yes. Congressman Frenchill, first, you are a long time friend of France, but in your family, we have your grandfather and we have your great-uncle, Ralph, who both fought during World War I in France. Another page of history. And Ralph, who was working for the Red Cross at the time, was awarded the Croix de Guerre. That's the most prestigious medal during this time. And I just want to tell you, not only the Arkansas people came from World War II, they came for World War I, 75,000. You imagine it was not a big population. They came. They came in Arkansas Post. They came in 1722 when we found the Little Rock. And now with the help of the DAR, with congressmen, we are going to try with the French consulate and the embassy to put Arkansas on the map. Because we were French and now we need to speak French. Aha! Arkansas needs to speak French. This is why January 12, 2026 was born the Association Française of Little Rock. We want to become the French Alliance. An Alliance Française is a global network, and in this network we can have access to all the exhibits, the lecture, the conferences, the show, the movies. It will be something, I think it's 1,000 Alliance Française all over the world, 100 in the United States. And this is a big work, and I salute again this team because they are pioneers. But we will succeed, I'm sure. And it's the 250th anniversary of America, and you know the French help. It was confirmed by the DAR. They said if we didn't give them the powder, the revolutionary will be Scottish. No? No, I joke. Okay, we help. We really help. And I think that March is also all over the world the Francophonie month. Francophonie means French-speaking countries all over the world. Africa, Middle East, Vietnam. We have a lot of countries that speak French. And it's a long month of festivities. And I want to tell you that UCA, our friends and partner, are doing a festival of French film. I think it's from March 13 to March 20, yes. And it's free, open to the public. Even the French can go. Because the French short film are the best in the world. We know in 5 minutes how to tell the whole story. We are really good for that. And I think it's not far, it's in Conway. You can go. Because our association will go all the territory. And I ask, we have 10 consulate general of France in the United States. Each consulate has a circumscription, and they put us with Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And we have a consul general with supervising all the region. And I told him when I was in Houston, you need to come to Arkansas. We are first, we are having this association. Second, we are French. We have people who are lovely. They are welcome and they are wonderful. And I said, do you want to come? And he said, yes. And it's why it's my pleasure to introduce to you, not a long time, Nathan. We are not going to, because it seemed the cherry on the chantilly. It's wonderful. But we are going to have the consul to say hi. First trip to Arkansas. Frank Marchetti.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Congressman French Hill, dear friends, dear guests, it's a real pleasure for me indeed to be here for my first tour to Arkansas, to Little Rock. I'm very impressed to see so many people here in this room. Very moved to be in this historical building that was that dated from 1840, I think. And very moved to be in this room where General MacArthur was born, and he was really a great man of the last century, a top general, U.S. general who transformed, who made history, and so it's very great for me to see that. It's you know, I was posted in Canada for 4 years. I was deputy chief of the embassy there, and before being appointed in Houston 6 months ago. So, like the French people centuries ago, you know, I went down south from Canada, from Quebec, from the Great Lakes to Texas, and now I am in Arkansas. And as you say, Beatrice, here I'm very happy to be here because I feel something very different from Texas. I mean, here there is a so we have tornado and also hurricane and floodings in Houston. So, but here I really feel the proximity, the intimacy with French history in the U.S. with all this common shared history along the Mississippi Valley, and that's extremely interesting for us. So yes, we are. I came here because we need to embody the celebration of the 50 years of anniversary of the U.S. the Declaration of Independence. For us, it means 250 years of friendship between France and the U.S., as Beatrice recalled. And so this is why I came because this event is a contribution to this celebration. And thank you again, Nathan, for your expose, and I look forward to listening to it. Actually, this event has two meanings. Celebration of this long shared history between Arkansas and France. And also, as Beatrice said, the launch of a new French association, Association Française. And I hope that this Association Française will become soon the new Alliance Française of Arkansas and Little Rock. So we are working hard on that, and I'm very grateful to the people who dedicate their time to this project. And I hope that later this year we will be able to announce the establishment of the new Alliance Française, part of a French network in the US, and so that will be another great event. I hope the French ambassador, will come here also to make this announcement. And so we are very supportive of this initiative. And I would like also to say that it's very important to celebrate our shared history, Arkansas, France. But it's important also for the future. I mean, shared history helps to build also a shared future. And I'm very proud here in Arkansas, in Little Rock, to see the power of French companies. Yesterday, I spent all the day at Dassault Falcon Jet, and I saw Georges and his wife. Sorry, merci Georges. I spent all the day to understand the business of Dassault Falcon Jet, and I was very impressed by that. We have L'Oréal Group also, main French company also, and we have other dynamic French companies in Arkansas. We are the third foreign investor in Arkansas. So this is also the future of Arkansas and France, and we are very proud of that. And I'm very grateful to local authority, congressman, the state, the governor, Secretary of Commerce, to support this French economic presence. So thank you again for being here. I look forward to listening to Nathan, and thank you very much, Beatrice, for all what you do in Arkansas. You are the best honorary consul we could have here. Really? Thank you to you and to your husband, Shelby, who plays also a very important role. Thank you for all your connection. It's a real pleasure to work with you, and I will be back soon to Little Rock for sure. Thank you. Merci.
But I will say, actually, that I am not like a French short film director and cannot tell a story in just 5 minutes. So I hope we can start the clock on my hour now. So I want to thank Stephen McArthur and the museum for hosting us. I want to thank Len Johnson. Thank you very much for your expertise tonight. And of course, I want to thank the Consul General and the Honorary Consul. and the congressman, and all of our distinguished guests. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous for being here. Merci. So, first things first, today we're going to talk about Petit Jean. Petit Jean for me encapsulates everything I'm going to discuss today, so I'll get to why I've entitled it that. But I did want to highlight that you can scan this code if you would like to see my maps and images up close. I also have a link to a fuller website where I'm trying to hash all these ideas out. And mostly, I really want to know if you have any questions, suggestions, or corrections for me, especially because I'm new to Arkansas relatively, so I'm sure you know things better than I do about the geography of the state. Please feel free to reach out via my university email address. So speaking of that, my name is Nathan Marvin, and I am an associate professor of French history at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. Okay, let's just dive right in here. Okay, now we know this beautiful spot, but I'm gonna pause it so we don't get dizzy and sick here. So when we're asked to think about a French colonial space in North America, Arkansas is perhaps not the first region that comes to mind. But French roots run deep in the natural state. In 1686, the French established a foothold along the Arkansas River in Ogapa-Majon, the homeland of their Quapaw allies. And after several fits and starts, the modest fort and settlement at Arkansas Post grew to become the most significant between Natchez and Natchitoches, Louisiana, and the Illinois country across the river. And it served as a linchpin between Upper and Lower Louisiana under Spanish rule as well, between 1764-ish and 1802, all the while French remained the region's most spoken European language. And in Arkansas, it's often assumed that most remaining Francophone communities vanished after 1803, after the annexation and the Louisiana Purchase. In fact, French-speaking hunters and settlers of remarkably diverse origins and statuses continued to live and work in Arkansas, and their presence shaped the region well into the 19th century. So why is so little remembered, of these Creoles of Arkansas, as their Anglo-American neighbors called them, and the world they made here? My talk today is going to try to shed some light on the reasons for that erasure, and to recover long hidden and misunderstood chapters of our French history. So, in truth, we're going to see, I hope, after this talk, the legacies of French Arkansas are all around us if we know where to look. So here's just one example. Oh, let me go backwards, actually. The beautiful site, folks here will know it, of Emerald Park in North Little Rock. This, of course, we're looking toward Pinnacle Mountain, once called La Mamelle in French. Two landmarks, Big Rock and Pinnacle Mountain, of river navigation well known to Arkansas Creoles. Big Rock, the first major outcrop on the river, lies 121 miles above its confluence with the Mississippi, site of the old post. And in 1722, the French explorer Jean-Baptiste Bénard de la Harpe climbed this bluff, naming it Le Rocher Français, and planting the arms of the King of France. Now to the Quapaw, the Ogapa, the river was called Nijite, which means Red River, and it's a name evoked nearly a century later in an interview between one of the first American territorial governors in 1827 with one Baptiste Ambeau, whose land we're actually standing on now. It's fascinating. An Arkansas Creole of French and Lipan Apache parentage, who presented himself and was widely accepted by both U.S. and Quapaw officials as French Quapaw. So the world that existed and persisted here after the Louisiana Purchase, as we'll see, was very much métissé. It was a mixed world, populated by families of European, indigenous, and African descent, and what the great historian of colonial Arkansas, Judge Buzz Arnold, refers to as a truly cosmopolitan place in every sense of the term. So Arkansas was not an isolated outpost. We tend to think this, I think. It was actually an integral part of what Jay Gitlin, who's a historian at Yale, has dubbed the Creole Corridor. This was a vast arc of French settlements stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the St. Lawrence River. And we have only to glance at the birthplaces of those named in the surviving sacramental registers of the Catholic Church in 18th and 19th century Arkansas to see just how broad this catchment zone was and how thoroughly interconnected. So you get a small majority who are born in Arkansas, but others come from further down the Mississippi, such as the Acadian and German coasts, today's Louisiana, and upstream, including Kaskaskia, Illinois, Vincennes, I think it's Vincennes, they say, Indiana, and as far north and east as Detroit, Montreal, and Quebec City. Still, others arrive from beyond the Creole corridor altogether. You have English-speaking Catholics from Virginia and North Carolina, Spanish subjects from colonial New Mexico and Spain itself. And in other parts of the former Louisiana Territory, annexation by the United States in Arkansas as other places, it opens up a floodgate of Anglo-American colonization from the east. And that accelerated also the expansion of the institution of slavery in this state. And in 1804, when American troops arrived, the post had a permanent population of about 400 free and enslaved, with an additional 500 Quapaw living close by. And 2 decades later, the Arkansas Territory's population is going to grow to more than 14,000. By 1850, we're talking 210,000 people, driven largely by cotton cultivation. So the people we're going to talk about today are the people who survived, who experienced this. What happened to these people? What happened to their way of life, their culture? It's actually a very complicated story. There are some elites, some who worked with the new American regime, volunteering to secure the fort, help survey its contents. But even in some of those same families, we're going to see drastically divergent trajectories. Their lives reflect the range of strategies Arkansas Creoles employed in the early 19th century to maintain their land, their status, and their way of life. So speaking of these families, we have to understand that this is not Missouri, it's not St. Louis, it's not New Orleans, okay? French-speaking families in Arkansas face particularly steep odds. They lack the numbers, the political clout, the capital to compete with newcomers from the East. So inevitably, many do intermarry with Protestant families and assimilate to the dominant culture. Some retain their footholds by securing US recognition of 18th century Spanish land grants. And others are not so lucky. Some quickly sell their land to speculators. But some work assiduously to retain their land, but also their Creole identity as Catholics and as French speakers. These include the families associated with former commandants at the fort under French and then Spanish rule. You have 3 prominent lineages, and it's easy to remember because they all start with V. You have the Vaugin, the Vallière, and the de Villemont. And here, this beautiful portrait of the young Félicité Vallière, who sat for this painting in New Orleans, where she also attended the Academy of the Ursuline Sisters. I'm grateful to Victoria Chandler at the Historic Arkansas Museum for pointing out to myself and my students that if you zoom in, I don't know how close we can get here, she's holding a little pet chipmunk. And what I love about this is it's very much the respectability politics, the self-fashioning that you see in my home region of New England, where John Singleton Copley is always painting these well-to-do children with their pet squirrels, for example. But this is a really Arkansas twist on that, I think, the chipmunk. And even better, and again, speaking of New England, one quote I love, there is a Boston native, Hiram Whittington, who migrates here in the 1820s. I think he was working on the newspaper. He reports another Arkansas twist on this custom. He spots what he calls 2 French girls in Little Rock leaving a ball with 2 raccoons that they have as their lapdogs. So that's a frontier twist on this custom. The Vallière Vaugin were a family steeped in the Creole world of La Louisiane. Marie-Félicité herself married François Vaugin, son of the longtime Arkansas Post officer Étienne de Vaugin, in New Orleans, in the Cathedral of St. Louis, in 1792. It binds these 2 prominent families to the Post together. And the networks surrounding them stretch far beyond Arkansas because the Vaugin, they maintain property and business interests in the Caribbean. We'll talk a little bit about Saint-Domingue, Haiti today. And they travel frequently to New Orleans, and they continue to correspond with family in France. And to this day, the family in France corresponds with people here. And they put together a beautiful journal that was published recently. They also serve under the Spanish, and some are trained in Spain when, of course, the Spanish take over the Louisiana Territory from France. So the family world that emerged from those connections, these families, extends into the next generation as well. And you see the Vosgines and the Vallières, they position themselves as important benefactors of the most important anchor of Creole tradition, which of course is the Catholic Church. And they donate land for chapels, cemeteries, even a Catholic school, so that the family would not have to send their daughters downriver for the education that they needed to what they simply called at the time La Ville, which was New Orleans. They so loved their Louisiana home, I love this, that they named one of their daughters, what else but Louisiana. Here we see her name, and you can zoom in right here. Anglicized because the Kentucky-based Sisters of Loretto only spoke English. And these were the sisters who were recruited to run the Catholic school patronized by the Vosgines in the 1830s and 40s. This is the oldest Roman Catholic church in Arkansas. It no longer looks like this. It was dismantled and brought to another location in Plum Bayou. But in that location, they also reinterred the remains of their family members. And in this beautiful cemetery that you can still see today at Old St. Mary's, some of the names inscribed in the grave markers are those important names of French Arkansas: Vosgines, Desruisseaux, Vallières, Bogy, Coussat, Dardenne, Antoine, Barthélemy. Some of the same names that dot our landscape in this state in southeast Arkansas today. Okay, so now we need to talk about a very particularly Arkansas survival strategy for Creoles. Some Creoles in Arkansas benefit from a unique carve-out in the treaties that were signed by who? The United States and the sovereign Quapaw Nation. In 1818, a vast swath of territory stretching across nearly the entire width, I'll show you this separately here on the left, of what is now Arkansas but also Oklahoma, is ceded, that's the word used, to the United States, with the exception of this small wedge that you see right here. Of course, on the left side, this is Little Rock, and on the top, that's the Arkansas River. So that was supposed to be left as a reserve for the Quapaw, but even that little wedge of land was taken again by the US government in 1824, and so then vanished, and the Quapaw are forced to march to the Red River region. But what is so very fascinating about that treaty in 1824 that establishes the cession of that wedge of land is you see French names. So why? There are 11 Creole men specifically named in the 1824 US Quapaw Treaty as beneficiaries of first choice parcels within the ceded zone. And most of their names still grace the streams and bayous that run through that area of our state. Their names are also those I just mentioned in the churchyard of St. Mary's. So despite being grandfathered into this treaty that's negotiated, they were not necessarily connected to the Quapaw Nation. And this is what is so fascinating. Saracen, you might have all heard of him. He is a half Quapaw man. And then the Bunn brothers also, I think, were half Quapaw. But the rest of them, we're talking about people whose maternal ancestors had been enslaved, captive Indian women. And we don't think about them very often. They come from the far west, places like New Mexico, the Lipan Apache, called in French sometimes the Cons. You have Osage among their maternal ancestors, and also Plains Apache women. And this is really interesting because these same men do become adopted into the Quapaw community later, if they choose to be. And this is really fascinating. Why are they on this treaty? You see this in other US and Indian nation treaties. It's because they're what the United States called derisively half-breeds. So they're métis, they're mixed, and it didn't matter whether they were Quapaw or not. For the US government, that was good enough, and they could take part of this land. So in a fascinating irony, these families who had long been censused as fully white by the French and Spanish governments, so they assimilated basically, now will claim their mixed status to have access to land in our state. So it doesn't turn out well for all of them though. And a couple folks, this is really fascinating, will migrate with the Quapaw west. So where do they go? You all know the history of this country. Most nations end up in Oklahoma. That too is the case of the Quapaw in 1833, just this tiny little pink parcel of land, I think in what is now Ottawa County, Oklahoma. So here is what is really beautiful, I think, just showing the longevity of the connection between the French Creoles and the Quapaw community, is that to this day, in the phone books of the Quapaw Nation, you have Vallières, Dardenne, Barthélemy, all the names that you see. So that's a really fascinating story, but it's not the only kinds of French people we have. And this is another really fascinating thing that I was so excited to discover when I took this position. As somebody who studies the global effects of the Haitian Revolution, and we knew, of course, the Haitian Revolution diaspora was a mixed diaspora, white, free people of color, black, and it was all over. It reshaped the demographics and the politics of the United States of America. People know the Alien and Sedition Act, for example. And it also reshaped France. It reshaped other places in the Caribbean, other slave societies around the Atlantic world. And right here in Arkansas, we have the Thibault family. I don't know if people have ever seen Thibault Road that is out past the airport, but that road is named after a family of Saint-Domingue Haitian exiles who came to Arkansas via Philadelphia. They were actually silversmiths, and here's kind of what their signatures looked like in their products. They didn't ply that trade here. I think they became farmers, but you can see the remains of their land is so beautiful. And this is actually Quapaw land. Some of it's been given, I think, to the Port of Little Rock, but it is just a beautiful place. If anyone ever gets out to what's called Fush Island past the airport, and this unfortunately does not survive, but this is the Thibault household. There are others who come too from the Napoleonic Wars. You might have heard of Antoine Barraquet. There's another man named Frédéric Notreb. These are men who come late in the 19th century, but they use that ascendancy that French people have among the Creoles who already live here and the native Quapaw to become important negotiators between the community on the ground and the US government. So they play a really important role. And we gotta talk, of course, about place names, because that's what is so exciting to me. So I want to dwell a little bit on something. Judge Arnold is going to come up so many times in this talk. He's become a good friend, and he really is, I think, the pioneering historian of colonial Arkansas. But Buzz Arnold has a wonderful line in one of his books where he jokes that the way that we pronounce words in our landscape in Arkansas, we've been speaking French the whole time. First, I was so thrilled to hear neither of you say Arkansas, which sometimes I hear in French, because of course we retained the S, the silent S from the French. And then there's the Ozark. Everyone loves the Ozark Mountains. This word, Judge Arnold explains to us, comes from an abbreviation of post-Ozark. So you get the Ozark and the beautiful liaison between the X and the A, and we have anglicized it to Ozark. So this is what Buzz means when he says we've been speaking French the whole time. And it's not just there. The more you look at the map, let me see if I can get my slides for you here. The more you look at some of the places we have, I mentioned, if it'll show up, I don't know. I mentioned Marmel, which has a U the way that we write it here, but of course in French it does not. And then there's places a little bit further like this. Who's ever driven past Fush-la-Fave River? So the key sometimes is to pronounce these words like this man, who after whom it's named, would have pronounced it. He was from Quebec. So if you say Fush-la-Fave, you understand it's actually Monsieur Lefebvre who gave us this name, Fush-la-Fave. And he was one of the most important Creoles of the Little Rock region in particular. Married a Protestant woman and started an important business in good American fashion. Marmel, I mentioned that already. I love the history behind that one. And then there are some real weird ones, okay? There's a place called L'Eau Frette. Again, Canadian, L'Eau Frette. It's cold water. Then there's a place called Casamassa Creek. That's someone's name, Cacha Masson, the family Masson. And then there are some truly weird ones. Let me see if I haven't gone past it too much, but my favorite is a city called Smackover, Arkansas. Again, you gotta get in the mood. You gotta really feel it and say, Chemin Couvert. Oh, this is the Chemin Couvert, the covered path. This is very romantic. Sometimes people say Sumac Couvert, I accept it. Chemin Couvert because the river of that name is covered with a beautiful canopy of trees that hang over the river. So these are just some of the many ways that I think we just, every day, we see the place names around us, but we forget what they mean. And if you really think about it, right, we sometimes say, compared to St. Genevieve, compared to St. Louis, compared to New Orleans, we just don't have the built environment here. We don't see a lot of the vestiges of French, but they're on the landscape. They're written all around us. And one of the most exciting things I think for me as a historian is place names are one of the most frequent ways in our daily lives we encounter the past. We encounter history, right? So to do honor to the people behind the place names, you gotta really investigate who the people were. okay? This is my conviction personally. Now I'm on a little mission, right? But it is really important because in the history of our country, we must remember what geographer Laurie Savoy says. She reminds us that the reality of place names all around us in the United States is that we live among countless landscapes of memory in this country. They convey remembrance, but they also convey omission, right? What's left out of the story. You have layers upon layers of names and meanings that lie beneath the official surface. So, in the spirit of uncovering some of these layers, I'm going to pivot from talking about the families, their strategies, what happened when the US emerged. And I'm going to talk about one of the most arguably famous French place names in the state of Arkansas, right? Our beloved Petit Jean State Park. This is one of the most visited parks in the South. It's very, very popular. And I think when most Arkansans think of French colonial history, they picture this mountain, Petit Jean Mountain, rising above the Arkansas River, more than 100 miles upstream from the colonial outpost at Arkansas Post. So why does this French name exist? Well, we know at its summit, folks who have been there will be familiar with this. It's a really beautiful place. I hope you get to visit if you haven't. At the summit, there's a grave site. This is the grave of Petit Jean. And there's a beautiful wooden cross and an iron fence, and people leave memoirs and souvenirs. This is the site of a beloved legend in our state. This is where supposedly a young French woman, disguised as a cabin boy, is said to have died in the 1700s. People never know really when, right? While following her fiance to the New World, right? To get on the ship, she had to pretend to be a boy, basically. So she's disguising as Petit Jean is the name that she's given by the people on the ship. And Petit Jean is like a very well-known in the 18th century diminutive, like a lot of artisans could have this name, soldiers could have this name. Of course, it means little John, sorry. So it's all supposed to be named after her. In fact, and this is so fascinating to me, as somebody who comes from a region where you had a lot of French and English tension, which is the upper parts of New England, you had Acadie meeting New England, there are a lot of legends where I come from too. And I was corrected once in this beautiful way. And I won't tell you the story of this because that would be a great diversion. But I'll just say that I realized that all legends, there's usually a kernel of truth. So I went looking for the kernel of truth in the Petit Jean legend. And I stumbled upon a piece of newsprint from the 1878. It's an article in a paper out of Dardanelle, but it's republished here in the Gazette. And it was aimed at recruiting migrants to that region. And the most fascinating thing about it is that there are connections between the story in that newsprint and something that, again, Judge Arnold will highlight for us from the actual historical record, okay? So one of the things in this story is, here it is, sorry, I misquote myself, 1869, okay? In French colonial times, they're reporting an oral tradition in the Dardanelle area. There had been a French cook serving a party of voyageurs who, while the others were out, he was surprised by a party of Osage and killed. And when the others returned, they buried their beloved friend at the foot of the mountain where they had made camp along the river, a mountain and a river that still bears his name, Petit Jean. So in this story, Petit Jean is not a woman, is a man, right? And his comrades had honored the place of his death by naming it after him. So one of the most fascinating things is how 100 years later, this echoes something real in the historical record. But first, I just want to digress. I keep doing this, I know, but it's important. Why do we have the Petit Jean as a woman figure that we do? And it's important, I think, to contextualize it, right? Why is she like this gender-bending heroine? So for one thing, this is something obvious, but I think it deserves thinking about. The male given name Jean is pronounced in English Jean, which is a woman's name for us, right? And then we have to remember that the cultural literacy that would have been familiar to Americans about France and French America, especially in the early 20th century, and accelerating during France's involvement with the US in the world wars, were things like Joan of Arc. If you go in the other room of this wonderful museum, you'll see the image of Joan of Arc used in propaganda posters in the First World War. that was an image to conjure with for Americans, right? They're saying, support the war effort by bonds, right? And Joan of Arc saved France. You too can save your country. So this was a very well-known figure for the United States. And then there's Mark Twain's very famous and popular novel about her. There were silent movies that came out in the early 20th century. And then there are similarities between our Petit Jean legend and other stories that circulated. Abbé Prévost's Manon Lescaut also ends with two lovers who die after crossing the Atlantic and ending up in, for some reason, what is a desert in Louisiana. There's not really a lot of deserts, but I don't think Abbé Prévost knew too much about it. And then there's the very important to any school child born around that era in the early 20th century in this country, which was Longfellow's Evangeline poem, where you also have two star-crossed lovers. They reunite on the deathbed of the fiancé, right? And this is a story of the Acadian expulsion. Anyway, there was lots floating around, is what I'm trying to get at, that may help explain why you have the gender-bending version of the legend. But it really takes off in the middle of the 20th century. And we're talking about a veritable cottage industry of Petit Jean literature. I mean, you have the very important Lucille Clergy Rankin book, I think 1950s, maybe 1940s, The Legend of Petit Jean Mountain, that adds new embellishments. You have all the wonderful signage that's produced based on this that you can still find at the park today. This is that actual newsprint that I mentioned of the male Petit Jean, but predominantly we're talking about a woman Petit Jean. And to this day, it is such an important story for so many people, I think. But let's get to the real story, potentially, okay? And I don't want anyone leaving here saying, oh, this professor says that this is the definitive truth. I'm just putting it out there. This is a theory, okay? I just think we should caution ourselves about being too quick to dismiss the legend completely, okay? So, I mentioned the 1869 paper. Well, there is a remarkable set of documents, unfortunately nothing else exists but this, that exist in the Archives Nationales d'Outre-mer in Aix-en-Provence. And you find in there a 1732 report from Louisiana Governor General Bienville. So let us recall that Arkansas Post, of course, is a district of French Louisiana at the time. Bienville is reporting to his superiors in Versailles that recently an Osage war party, angered by encroachments on their hunting grounds in the upper Arkansas, attacked a French hunting camp in an expedition for buffalo and other pelts. And at first, when the party failed to return home to Arkansas Post, officials there believed all 11 members of the party had perished. The survivors, it turns out, had fled overland, so you can see kind of where they went here. They went overland through the Ozarks to the safe haven of Kaskaskia in the Illinois country, then went down the Mississippi, instead of going through the more perilous and common way, which was the Arkansas River. So they left behind the bodies of two of their fallen comrades, referenced in the governor's reports as one, an unnamed enslaved man, probably of West African descent, and another recorded only as Petit Jean, and then there's one other word there. Bohème. Okay. In English, that would be Bohemian. Here's one report, here's the second version a little bit later. Petit Jean Bohème is written as serving as an engagé, meaning he cooked and he tended the campground while the others were hunting. So very similar to that 1869 newspaper, interestingly. So without proper context, this is probably meaningless for a lot of us, right, in 2026. What does this word mean? In early modern France, Bohème referred to members of the Romani diaspora, marginalized as outsiders and beginning under Louis XIV, increasingly targeted by the French state as scapegoats for the nation's ills. And the stigma associated with this community, dozens, maybe hundreds of them, were deported to the empire's penal colony, that's to say Louisiana. It helps explain what else is in the governor's report. I have a little bit closer, maybe you can read it, those of you who are reading French. One initial response is the French suspend trading with the Osage, their trading partners, who in turn send diplomatic missions to Arkansas Post to reimburse the price of the enslaved man And as for Petit Jean, I'm going to call him Petit Jean, they expressed their sincere regret. They had mistaken him for an indigenous man of another nation and did not recognize him as looking like other Frenchmen. It was not their intention, they say, to kill a French subject. Now, this is actually a really interesting piece of evidence because late 20th century historians have used this to say the Osage were very, very perfidious. They were treacherous. They were disingenuous. But if you understand Petit Jean's background, the confusion on the part of the Osage actually makes a little bit more sense. And further contextualizing this is really important because the French at this time were fresh off a campaign to essentially annihilate the Natchez Nation following that nation's attack on the French fort of the Natchez area in 1729. And there was little appetite for another war among French officers. So what does Governor Bienville do? He decides against retaliation beyond the temporary trade embargo, and he decides that Petit Jean and the unnamed man are not worth enough to go to war, basically, for vengeance over. So, can we get at maybe who this guy was? Are there enough records to tell us? Is it possible to know any more about him and the other Roma who migrated to French America? So, like many individuals arrested and imprisoned during this period, some Romani prisoners are deported to Louisiana to serve in the colonial army or to help popularize and stabilize the struggling colony. And one of the most significant ships to carry them from France to Louisiana was a ship called the Tilleul, which departs from Dunkirk in May 1720 with 341 passengers on board. And there's a man referred to only as Petit Jean in the 1730s. Documents may well have arrived in North America on that very ship, which carried dozens of Romani families grouped in the passenger list here by sex and legal status, whether they were prisoner or voluntary migrant. Upon arrival, some of these Romani migrants settled in Pascagoula, near the Biloxi landing site of the Tilleul. Others later in the century moved to the Red River region. This is all so fascinating to me. Before I did this research, I had no idea that a community of gypsies lived in French Louisiana, including people who are featuring in separate companies of Bohème in the army. They're in separate segregated regiments. They're mobilized to defend Arkansas Post and the Illinois country. That's how Petit Jean would have come up the river, up the Mississippi. And could he be one of several of the Jeans listed as Bohème prisoners on the Tilleul's passenger list? It's a tempting conclusion that it's either Jean Gaspard or Jean Christophe. These are two people in there. Neither name appears in the documentary record after the 1720s and 1730s, the very period, of course, during which Petit Jean is reported to have died. So both of these Jean, if they were indeed separate individuals, I think they could have been the same person, were connected to another Romani woman named Marie-Agnès Simon. She had arrived aboard the Tilleul with her first husband, Jean-Christophe, and their children. Genealogists have traced connections between the Romani passengers of the ship and a family in New Orleans who later migrated to the Arkansas Post, and some of you may have heard of this family before, the Saucier. Sometimes you see their name as like S-A-U-C, sometimes S-O-C-I-E, sometimes with an S-A-U-T-I-E-R-S. Several of them are buried in our state cemeteries. In 1732, the same year of Petit Jean's disappearance, you have a Marie Bohémienne who is recorded as residing on their property, that's to say the Saucier's property, in what is now the French Quarter of New Orleans, located on the corner of Royal and St. Peter Streets. You could go there today and see the site, actually. So Marie-Agnès maintains close ties with other Louisiana Bohème while she's in this neighborhood. By 1725, she's recorded as the wife of Jean Gaspard, possibly the same Jean Gaspard listed among the passengers of the Tilleul. However, this figure may in fact be Jean-Christophe, her first husband, under a different name. But there's a Jean Gaspard who appears in military records as a drummer, and Romani people were often musicians in the army. Serving under Captain Leblanc, who was not stationed on the Gulf Coast at that time. He was actually further up in our area, the Mississippi. So later, this Marie, she remarries to someone named Joseph, who was listed as her spouse at the time of her death in Mobile in 1743. So this raises a lingering question. What happened to Jean, whether Gaspard or Christophe, that left Marie a widow and eligible to remarry? Could it be a Petit Jean? Although Marie died in Mobile, her descendants eventually relocated to the Red River region of Northwest Louisiana, settling near an international community of Pascagoula and Biloxi people who had migrated from their Gulf Coast homelands alongside them, and visitors to the area throughout the 19th century, including none other than landscape architect and journalist Frederick Law Olmsted, continue to note the presence of what they call Egyptians, a common term for Roma, both in this inland region and along the Gulf Coast, where they become famous for building schooners for the coastwise trade. Again, I'm a historian of the French colonial world. I had never heard of this community or any of these stories. It's just fascinating. Okay, so why does all of this matter? Why am I up here talking to you about genealogy, reminding communities, place names? It's important, I think, to understand the real names behind the stories. Behind the place names, the real people behind the place names. Because there has been something that occurred starting in the early 20th century of a kind of whitewashing of French history in Arkansas, if not obscuring it altogether. In the textbooks from that period that are designed for Arkansas children, you often see the French people, if described at all, they're mentioned as living in inappropriate intimacy to Indian people, of course, but also this notion that they simply weren't industrious enough, like Anglo-Americans. And it's not necessarily super malicious in all of these texts, but the idea is that they were here, they did their part by forging good, healthy relations with the local indigenous population, and now they need to step aside and let more enterprising settlers come. And this is not just an Arkansas story. You see this across the American West in what a French historian named Gilles Avard calls Phantom America. That's that there are still, into the 19th century, so many French families in the American West. But the tyranny of the Western film genre and all those novels meant that in this country, just like in the US, people know more about like Davy Crockett and Lucky Luke than they know about the actual French heritage of the American West that continued, that persisted. And so it's actually in the spirit of kind of correcting that whitewashing that I want to think of place names as our gateway, our entry point into the real French and Creole history of our region, which is really deep and beautiful and complicated and multi-layered. Because I truly think that in fostering a sense of place with these stories that are stories of a much more, as Judge Arnold says, cosmopolitan population than we imagine, you actually can get at a much more meaningful sense of place for everybody. And I think it's really exciting watching my students, for example, start to dive into the individual stories in all their complexity and diversity of all these amazing Arkansas Creole people and families. And I really do think that you don't have to go very far. It's not like you have to push a narrative of inclusivity. It's there. You just need to do a fuller, more accurate accounting of history. And I will mention the history is being done. And I think it's really important to render accessible the amazing work of people like this myth-busting work of people like Sonia Tucci, Judge Arnold, Andy Beaupre, all kinds of people who are working on this subject currently. So that's kind of my little mission. Clearly, I'm on my little hobby horse. But again, as I said, I welcome any comments, questions, corrections, suggestions. And I thank you very much for your time talking about French Arkansas with us today. Thank you.